Pues bienvenidos, everybody. I am CHERRÍE MORAGA. I am the co-director with Celia Herrera Rodriguez of Las Maestras Center for Chicana Indigenous Thought, Art, and Social Practice. And this is our third writer in the series, The Latinx Public Voice. I don't know, the hits, to me, as far as I'm concerned, the hits just keep coming. It's been really good. I'm nervous every single time. Probably I'm the most nervous with this particular guest, María Hinojosa, because this is her genre. This is what she does. She interviews people. She's interviewed me many, many times. She's an award-winning journalist, and I will read her whole bio, but I think I want to just begin by saying that probably, I think more than anybody that really comes to my mind now, that she has been singularly important in bringing visibility to Latinx public voice to the United States, to Latin America. We're really, really lucky to have her on this planet. And it's an honor to introduce her. I will tell you a few things about her. She's the first Latina in many newsrooms and is the anchor and executive producer of the Peabody Award-winning Latino USA on NPR. She is the founder and CEO of Futuro Media Group based in Harlem. I've been there. It's an amazing, amazing production, and she produces the show. Her 30-year career has garnered Hinojosa 4 Emmy Awards and 2 Robert F. Kennedy Awards for Excellence in Journalism. Among many other honors, she was the first Latina to anchor the PBS FRONTLINE report Lost in Detention in October 2011. Hinojosa's journalism has informed millions about the changing cultural and political landscape in America and abroad from a distinctly Latina perspective. And I think more than anything, that's why I hold her in such high regard. And it's really a privilege to welcome you, Maria. It's been a little bit of time, and I'm really excited we're switching chairs here, right? Yes.
I'm so happy to be here with you, amiguita.
Yes. So I do want to say that it was your piece, it was your book, because all of the books that we're covering this year were really introduced in 2020. Those are the original productions of those books, publication of those books, and those books also had a distinctly personal political perspective for all of them. But your book is where I got the idea, because you had asked me to do a blurb for it when it was still, was due to come out. And I want to read my blurb, okay? And let everybody know what I thought of it without planning this whole event, right? And it goes, "Change starts with knowledge," writes María Hinojosa. And by the close of this book, she has assembled a full arsenal of facts, stats, and deeply complex histories to weaponize a revolution of justice in this country. The courage of Hinojosa's reportage resides not only in her ability to enter the ground zero of a conflict, but to also turn the lens on herself. And I think that's probably the strongest achievement in this work. It's a hard road. It's a hard road. Hers is the American dream, realized and rejected for the deeper truth of redemption in recognizing ourselves as other. So what more can I say? I'm done. I did my job. So no, I would like to start, and I know probably, and we are going to talk about the title of the book and the story attached to that. But I wanted to start with what impressed me kind of, before we were on the air, I said to you basically, I said, I'm going to do this as a writer, as opposed to doing it as a journalist. And as a writer, when I'm reading, I find the places that wake me up. I find the places that resonate inside of me. And I've been working, we teach this book in my, and it's called Latinx Public Voice. And this is one of the books that's required reading. And my students have their responses. I have my responses, right? But it's interesting because this was the place where I really felt, I identified so much. And I realized too, in this place of the book, early on, it's also the period in which I met you. which is in the early 1980s. I remember running into in the streets of, the Lower East Side. It's still the Lower East Side to us, right? And you were like, you were young. You're, a good 10 years younger than I am. So you were young and very excited, and it was kind of a really sweet moment. And I knew you because of your radio work, right? The radio work you were doing in Latin America, La Nueva Canción, the whole movimiento that was happening, from Chile and Argentina. I mean, all the result of those political movements. But listening to this very, very radical, revolutionary music from Latin America, and here was this young Latina doing this. And I didn't even know it was from Barnard. It just was, I didn't even know about that part. So that's the part I wanted you to read. I think you might have marked the book there, because what I like about it is that it is really a sort of birth of conciencia on a certain level. It is, you're like that young waking up to a politica.
So the section that you have me reading is this moment where I am, like all of us young people, wherever you are, you're trying to kind of find yourself, And when you are the other, right, in this case, still Latino, Latina, immigrant, Mexican in the United States, you're always trying to kind of find, like, where are my seeds, right? Where are my seeds? And so this is the moment when I encountered this seed of kind of public radio conciencia, which is kind of adorable. This is the first time that you're revealing to me that you were a listener to Nueva Canción.
Really?
So in all of the years that we've been together, this is the first time that you're saying that you were a listener and that you just kind of were a listener. And I'm just like, oh my God, that makes me so happy.
Oh my God, it really impacted me completely. No, it was my own kind of awakening. It's like suddenly your eyes have turned south too. I mean, there was a music to have you to look at those revolutions that were going on and the political struggles that were going on. It was through the music that then you started reading the books, and then music's a long story we could have. I mean, what's its impact in terms of also our other art forms.
Here's the thing that young people now, we have Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, et cetera, and so many more. Like, I'm stopping there. Back then, the television existed. There were newspapers. Neither one of those were interactive at all. And then you had live radio. Mm-hmm. And live radio was the Wild West. And live public radio was really the space for free thinkers, for artists. And so it isn't surprising that you as an artist would be engaging, on a radio show, because that's what we did.
Exactly. Yes. Right.
We didn't have anything else. There was no VHS. There were cassettes. There were cassettes. Right. And there was the radio. Okay. So this is an afternoon when I'm in a preteen. It says, it was a Saturday afternoon. I'm in Chicago. At home, all was calm. I was in my bedroom, finally taking down the life-size Elton John poster that I had been too lazy to remove since the 8th grade. I climbed down from my dresser and carefully rolled up the poster, kissing goodbye, another moment in my American preteen life. I had borrowed my mommy's old radio from the kitchen, a brown plastic one we had during our first Chicago years, the one that always sounded scratchy no matter what station it was on. And then suddenly I landed on a station. It must have been WBEZ 91.5 FM, and heard a voice like the ones on Mexican public radio. It wasn't an announcer or a DJ, but a journalist. Instead of yelling, he was speaking to me intelligently. My mind was exploding. I wanted to scream, but I needed to hear every single word. And I was afraid that if I let go of the dial, the voice would disappear the way sometimes things disappeared on the radio, with the slight movement of the thumb and forefinger, and then gone. I moved slowly to bring my ear closer. They were talking about Latin America, a phrase I heard only before in Mexico on the news in Spanish. It was like hearing Radio Educación style radio in English in the United States. And to my surprise, they were reporting about Latin America. The experience was a revelation of sorts, perhaps spiritual. two very different parts of myself had suddenly awakened and found themselves braided together. And now I knew what that sounded like. I knew that WBEZ existed on the dial, that at least at 2 p.m. on Saturdays, I could tune into this place and hear this. And so I did. 1 week later, I sat in my room and played with the dial at that exact time and found this station again. All the way to the left of the dial was my new community. This was where my ears wanted to live, listening to Radio Publica in English all alone in my bedroom.
Yeah, I could relate. Yeah. And then you took that, continue that idea of where you took it then when you came to Barnard and suddenly you began to work in radio. So this was kind of like this is where your toes got wet, right? In the beginning of it.
You know, I think it's a lot about being very Mexican immigrant-y, first generation-y, in the sense that I wanted to do as much as I could. I went to public school, grammar school, then I went to this private fancy high school where I was kind of encountering class and race issues and identity, of course, like all high school. But I took advantage of everything except for a lot of things like the newspaper. I always thought I was never good enough to work at the high school newspaper. So I didn't. When I got to college, I was like, Jesus, this is it. Like, you gotta, like, you know what? You gotta do it all. My sister had done radio in college where she went to Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin. And so I was like, okay, she liked it. Let me just see what happens. The key was that because of political organizing on this campus, I'm pointing because I don't live far from it right up here, because of the political organizing of Black students, of Latino and Latina students, of radical students protesting against the war and for free speech, protesting against Columbia University raising this park that I live next to and building a football stadium. Because of those things, there was radical activism, and that led to spaces on WKCR that has, a 90-mile radius around New York City. So a powerful signal. Because of their activism, there was space on the radio. And I basically, and this is kind of why I talk a lot about activism, especially when students are involved, because it's not like they knew of course they knew what they were doing, but they didn't have a playbook. And activism has a long legacy. And I ended up being part of a legacy of 1960s. Then I'm on campus in 1980, 81, and they're like, you have to do a radio show for us because we have these hours that were fought for and we can't let them go. And we've got nobody but you. And I'm like, I've got 10 records from La Nueva Canción. They're like, that's 10 more records than we have. Yeah. That's why I did it. So I loved bringing it back to the activism of students before me.
Yeah, it was an amazing time. I mean, it really was. I mean, that was the time for us where we were doing Kitchen Table Women of Color Press at the exact same time in New York City. I mean, as neighbors, right? It was just, and also, from my part, I was working at, San Francisco Women Against Rape. I was the co-coordinator of that. And so we're doing this, direct political work while we're back at home doing our, writing and, as young, women of color feminists at that time, right?
Oh my God. Kitchen, when you established that entire experience, it was mind-blowing to us because remember, I was at the Women's Studies Department also here at Barnard. So everything that you were doing, Cherie, everything that Gloria were doing. I mean, again, I've told you before, when it turned out that Cherie Moraga was moving to New York and through the grapevine, because we didn't have Twitter or anything, it's like, Cherie Moraga is moving to New York. It was like, oh my God, I've got to meet her. She's a Chicana feminist. Like, oh my God. So we knew about each other. You're right. What I love is the mutual inspiration, but also, there was a giddiness, and I love to talk about this. When I met you, I was like, how could I ever be? I mean, I was like, Cherie just established a publishing house, un editorial. They're publishing. Man, could I I could never do that.
Ya ves?
And that's why, again, for all the young people who are watching us, take the example of Cherie and I. We didn't know what the hell we were doing, but we were like jumping it.
Yeah. No, I think that's really important. I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, I feel like this, when you say a Chicana feminist, I think partly what people don't understand necessarily, because that's also New York, right? This isn't California. So the only Chicanas that I even knew about were a little group of them that were at Columbia, the affirmative action kids at Columbia, And it was a very different world, So to find another Chicana feminist was like, un milagro, So it's
It
amazing
was
time.
Also because this was, and I write about this in Once I Was You. It was also a very nationalistic time, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was like if you were Chicano, that meant that you were from California, maybe from Texas. And it was like, well, but I'm Mexicana from Chicago, so how does this? And to be Latina and to be actively feminist, radical feminist, not just feminist, but radical feminism, asking for something else, yeah, it did feel like there were not a lot of us, which allowed us to have a small sense of community.
Yeah. But what was true, though, is that those Puerto Rican sisters and Black sisters that I was working with, they taught me, like, a quality of, now they talk about intersectionality, but it was a living practice of how all of those sites of identity, not only in terms of oppression, but liberatory sites, that each one of those are liberatory sites. So I feel like, I always say this, but I had some of the best teachers in the world, and my Spanish sucked, and those Puerto Ricans it was great, because I would sit in these meetings, and they'd go, it's okay, está bien, hable, así. It's like, if it takes you 4 hours to do it right, go ahead and do it. There was a certain insistence. I mean, because, I come from California and we're allowed, English, Spanish, whatever. But I always credit them, too, for their righteousness politically was amazing, those Puerto Rican sisters. And they taught me an enormous amount. And it was also
Thank you for shouting them out, because you know what, everybody, this morning, of course, I was reading into what's happening in Puerto Rico, and, my heart just breaks. And the thing about Puerto Rican women that people need to understand is that there is a fierceness about them because they live in a perpetual colonial state, and they are highly aware of this.
Yes.
And so Puerto Rican women, I'm sure you saw the movie La Operación.
Mm-hmm. Years ago, yeah.
That was a moment that when we were like, oh, wow. And then there's a filmmaker, Ana María Rodríguez, no me acuerdo, but, it was a seminal movie. So it was like you were doing kitchen table press, you were publishing books, and here was a Puerto Rican sister who was making a radical documentary film exposing the forced sterilization of the women on the island. And so it was a time, but I feel like it's a similar time to now, except that there's not this pandemic, which has really messed with our heads. But it was a similar time of like, we're taking back this space and we're claiming our space.
Well, I think it's that balance. I mean, I agree with you. It's always important to understand, to know that you didn't invent yourself, I mean, we didn't invent ourselves, and this generation and the generations, even, the middle, kind of this middle set of generation, did not invent themselves. There is a history. But what's happening now is very, very distinct. And in a certain way, it is this 40, 50-year cycle that is kind of, and we're going to talk more about that, but just blowing us out of the water in terms of, the radicalism, the promise of radicalism, and co-optations, all of those kinds of things. But what I want to kind of roll back a little bit to talk about the origin story. And there is one of my students. What I do want to say about the class, when we had like a 3-hour discussion in the book. I mean, everybody was like, because we got in it. I mean, we got in it, and it's like the courage, the questions, very, very different perspective. There was controversies. There was, it was great. It was really great. And everybody came out of the class aplastadas, we say, right?
Oh
We're
my
just like
God.
you know,
Did you record it? I want to hear that class.
well, I have some of their, they certainly will write papers. You'll get those. But yeah, it was pretty, I didn't record it.
Wow.
But the thing is, one of the things that came up kind of really early on and was the title of the book, right? Once I Was You, una vez fui tú, right? So I think I want to open it with this question mark that one of the students has about the title. And this is Veronica, and she'll introduce herself. So she'll come, there we go.
Hola, Maria. My name is Veronica, and I'm a graduate student at UC Santa Barbara in the Department of Chicano Studies. And I have a question for you. I have a lot of curiosity and also some discomfort. The title of your book, Once I Was You. And you bring the reader to this moment in which you are looking into the eyes of a young girl who is from Central America and who will most likely end up in some kind of privatized deportation center somewhere in the country. And as you look at her, you come to this moment in which you say and you feel, once I was you. And I think that my question is coming from what I believe is really unknown to us about the experience of these children. It's really unclear what it is that they have experienced, what kind of impact this will make on their lives, and how or when they will be free from this system that is currently making profits off of their incarceration. And because it is really unclear what will be of their future, I ask myself and I ask you if it's appropriate, if it is fair to say, once I was you, when it is that migrations from Central America are a part of a humanitarian crisis that is very distinct from some of the migration from Mexico and what I believe you described as the migration that your family experienced. And I ask this for all of us as we are witnessing and grappling with what the incarceration of these young children means for all of our humanity, what it means for all of us who have witnessed this phenomenon and are yet to bring it to an end. So I hope that makes sense. And I'm really interested in your response and this conversation in general. So thank you.
Thank you for that question. I know it took courage to ask that question. So first of all, just to zero in, when I wrote that line, what I was trying to say was that I had just realized and come into contact with the extraordinary amount of trauma that I had been carrying for decades that I couldn't even name. So I think it was almost about the trauma that we don't know, but that I could see in her eyes at that moment. I think in the writing of the book, if there is so much that I write about the Central American experience that makes it so clear that it is, in fact, something very specific and unique in that moment in the 1980s, and then at the end of the book in terms of what's happening now. So I'm not sure. I know that you might think like there's a conflation there, but actually it's pretty clear that I'm not saying that was me. that I learned from the Central American experience of the 1980s, absolutely. But not that that's my experience. So here's the backstory. And I think, Cherie, we may have talked about this in terms of titles. You know, we didn't have a title for the book at all. And it was actually a source of tremendous amount of angst. And that introduction was not written until I had finished the book already. And my editor, Michelle Herrera Mulligan, says, okay, you got to write an introduction. I was like, are you kidding? And that's when I had to force, because I was done. You know how like when you're done with a book, you're done. And then I had to write again and write something that was like kind of extraordinary. And so I went back to the words of Sandra Cisneros, who told me, don't write about what you remember, write about what you wish you could forget. And that was how I wrote that opening scene, because I want to forget that scene. I never want to have to remember what I saw, but I will remember and forever. And I will write about it now. And I think it was something that was, when I witnessed that scene, and then later when I'm writing the introduction, obviously time passed. And it was in that time that passed that my own mother came to terms with what had happened. And that in fact, it could have been me. And that I heard her trauma. So I guess first of all, con mucho respeto, absolutely. Maybe I didn't make it clear enough. To say like, no, I came with privilege. And that's the point. I came with privilege. I had a green card. I had a father with privilege. And still they tried to take me.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Maria. It's a hard question, you know. I mean, I think too what resonated for me is my own experience with titles and with also using, and it's a longer question about journalism too, I think, you know, but that how we use what we know and use what we observe, you know, both, right? And we also, and I can say this for myself, you know, as a poet, is I also use metaphor. And I have got, like, I remember, for example, in the last edition of This Bridge Called My Back, it was right at the time in Tahrir Square where the Egyptian revolution is going on. And there's a woman, you know, she's an Egyptian woman, and she's saying, and she's just so happy, she's crying, everything, you know. And so I decided I was going to start this new edition of the book with the Egyptian revolution, because what had been missing in This Bridge Called My Back was a much more international perspective, was women, a transnational feminism, right? And this sister's going, you know, she's so excited, you know, she said it's this incredible moment. And I write, and so I wrote this poem, it came out of me, and I said, the Egyptian revolution is my revolution, right? The Egyptian revolution is my revolution, right? Now, you could look at that as appropriation, and I'm, you know, with all, I think Veronica's incredibly honest and really trying to really grapple with this question that came to her. So I'm not in any way discounting that. I was really proud of her engaging that question. But I've had somebody say to me that I was appropriating the Egyptian revolution, right? And I went, no. You're kind of going, no, because it's like I'm saying I'm a member in the sense that you know, you didn't invite me. I don't think you get invited to revolutions.
It's allyship.
Yes.
It's allyship.
But
it's solidarity.
Yes. But I think that even the word ally is kind of not strong enough. You know, I feel like there is something in it where you actually identify that it's visceral. Mm-hmm. There's a viscerality in it, you know. Mm-hmm. And I think these are, I mean, it's interesting, you know, and like the things come up. And after Veronica asked that question, I went through it in my mind and asking myself all really good questions about it. And because of how language is, talking is one thing, but language in print, can be read lots of different ways. And that is our task, and that is also, it's our responsibility, but it's also, you can't control it. You know what I'm saying? In other words, like you put it out, and you are, and like your response was thinking, let me think about this, let me see what I know, what I don't know. And that's what writers do. That's what writers do.
To me, I didn't finish the story but I should, in the sense that we didn't have a title. Mm-hmm. And so we had to bring in somebody who was completely removed, somebody who, we do, right, this happens sometimes in publishing. We brought in somebody completely fresh who didn't know anything. And that was the person who said, oh, there's the title right there. Mm. We didn't have that title. Part of my whole message in the United States, and, after Barack Obama won and the disappointment, I was like, should I or shouldn't I? But I think there is something about this generation where he and I are of the same generation, where it's like we wanted to say, like, we are you, like, we're all in this together. I feel like I'm getting much more radical now as I get older. I'm like, nah, I don't have any time for this, like, no more. But the once I was you would be to my fellow American folk, in other words, you as estadounidenses, to say, don't look at me as the other. See myself in you. You see yourself in me. You see yourself in me. Because once I was you, I did grow up in this country, in terms of the moment of civil rights. So I also appreciate that. I think it follows why it worked for me when somebody finally were like, well, here's, what about this as a title, is because I'm like, I've been saying this a lot in my work, right? I'm trying to make you feel something, which has nothing to do if you're Latino, a woman, a man, old, young. As a journalist, I actually am telling stories that I want to touch you. Because I see myself in you. In order to write a piece like that, I have to believe that we have a sense of common humanity.
Right. No, and I think...
I think that's been tested over the last
I think so.
40 years.
Well, 40 years.
Bueno, hace mucho, but I think, what we have lived just recently, right? Which is, white supremacy is loud and clear. Patriarchy is loud and clear.
Yes.
Capital. I think we now are like, we understand again. Right. We got this.
Yeah, I felt like that. I was remembering a part that you wrote about referencing Malinche, right? You talk very briefly about Malinche, so Malinche, the story of Malinche is, then there's the conquistador Hernan Cortez comes to Mexico, with indigenous Mexico, and she's sold into slavery. She's given to him as a concubine, etc. And she's really good at language, and she becomes his translator, etc. And then in the patriarchal version is that she sold out the indigenous Mexico, to the conquistadores, right? That's the non-feminist perspective on her, but not accounting for what's happened, where the Aztecs were, the Mexica were as imperialists in Mexico at that time, and you had good reason to want to see them, in fact, look forward to a different kind of world, where they were not, acting as their own conquistadors in their own way. But the point I wanted to make I just had to do that little background thing. But the thing about Malinche that always really interested me is that she was a translator, and she translated between the indigenas and these conquistadores, right? And she was a strategic advisor, etc. And historically, what's happened, then she, becomes this Mexican Eve, etc. And the part that I was thinking about is that the translator and the mediator, right? Ojos que no ven. It's like you try to get those ojos que no ven to see. And that is not the traitor. That is the person who's doing the hard work of the translation. Not all of us are capable of doing it. And partly what I want to say, Maria, is that there is a quality about you that, and you're right, man. I feel like I've watched you all these years. You are more radical than you've ever been in your whole life, you know, and that has to do, of course, the circumstances require it because the veil has been lifted completely, right? So you know, so on a certain level, did you? So what I want to get back to the Malinche bit, you know, is that some of us can't do it. We can't translate. It's impossible. And some of us can, right? And so this is also really saying this to young people too. If you see somebody that's doing it, it is the hard work, man. I mean, to translate to the oppressor in any way, to try to get those who might identify with the oppressor to come to your side, you know, and still maintain your integrity is, I think, some of the hardest work possible, you know. And this is the work that you do. And I'm going, girl, I'm not very good at it. I'm not very good at it.
I think it's also about being a border crosser. But I do want to say, actually, this is not the most radical that I've been in my life. It's just the most radical that I've been publicly, you know, in my life.
Yes, but sure.
I write a lot about being a radical activist in college. Those were the years when we were doing, you know, what we called third world women's work, right? Mm-hmm. It was that we see ourselves in each other. It's Black women, it's Latinas, it was, you know, women from Africa, it was the Caribbean. We were doing that kind of cross-border work. So I'm thinking about La Malinche in the sense like she was also a border crosser in many ways.
Yes.
And she was a survivor, right? That's the thing about La Malinche. She was also a survivor. She was like to her family, oh, you're going to sell me?
Yeah, they did.
Oh, you're going to sell me because I'm a woman? No, I don't think so. But, you know, we grow up as Mexican women con eso de la Malinche and with Eve, very much,
sure.
You know, clear. I mean, the saving grace is La Virgen de Guadalupe, you know, thank God for her.
Or Tonantzin.
You know, yeah, Tonantzin, you know, she kind of saves us. But I mean, this is part of what we're having to do, right? And thank you so much for your words about being like that person who is able to do that work. I'm looking forward to being able to travel again because I do a lot of that work when I'm traveling. I live in Harlem in New York City. I'm with my people here.
Right.
So I'm not having to do that kind of work here. I do that work when I'm traveling across the country. And, you know, Sherry, I'm in a car at whatever time, in a cab, getting to an airport at, 4 a.m. or 6 o'clock at night or whatever. And I'm having a conversation with whoever is driving that car. Mm-hmm. And I'm usually asking them, so, this is the way it goes. I'll just like be in the back seat. If I'm not exhausted, if I'm exhausted, I'm quiet. But if not, I'm just so, hey, can I ask you a personal question? And usually it's all men, usually mostly white men. And they'll say, sure. And I'm like, okay, I would never say yes. And that's when I ask them, so who'd you vote for? And they're like, whoa. And I'm like, yeah, yo no tengo pelos en la lengua. I'm going to ask you that question without like a whole lot of judgment behind it. And I've had deep conversations with people who started out the trip as an avid Trump supporter. And then at the end, some of them, have given me my luggage and said to me, can I hug you? Back before the pandemic and people would hug strangers. I'm cool with that kind of work. Mm-hmm. But what we're watching now, the Republican Party becoming a Donald Trump racist, fascist party, and Democrats trying to say, well, we've got to find common ground. No. No.
No, there's one of the questions I had for you is, did you ever think that you would hear on sort of main mainstream TV the word white supremacy as common language, and also patriarchy?
Hell no.
Because I don't know. I really? I mean, it's yes.
No, now this is right. So this is very important, right? That we're able to, because language, of course, is very important, but we also, it can't. So I'm at a point where also we can't get to a point where white supremacy is thrown out so much that it's like, well, just white supremacy. It's like, it's like, no. Let's be clear what we're talking about. Why? So the truth is that this week is like a really good week in my life because I'm speaking with you, Cherie, who I love and adore, and I mean, intellectually, poetically, I worship the way you speak. I do. I completely do. But I also got a chance this week to be with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in person.
I saw that.
And so it's a week of a lot of inspiration for us, and for us, learning from Black women that as Latinas, actually, what we do in this country, vamos a ver, it's gonna have a major impact here, and we have to own that power. And I think that the way we do it is like this, Cherie. Mm-hmm. I feel very blessed to be in conversation with you and I think it's important to have difficult conversations. So we're not afraid of that, by the way.
No, we're kind of used to it.
I'm sorry?
I say, and we're kind of used to it.
We're kind of used to it. So we're like, come on, let's do this. You think you're going to freak me out by some tough question?
No,
Problema.
I want to kind of go, because I know there's a lot of young people, that are also listening to this. And if you have not, and there will be a chat afterwards. So I don't want people to know that you can be kind of putting in your chat questions or comentarios here as we go along. And we'd love to share them with you, later on in this time together. But there's, so kind of moving back a little bit, just I think what has been really impressive in this book and that has impacted a lot of people is that you have these two stories going on. And one of them is all the obstacles you go through externally in a white man's world, right? I mean, it's a white man's world. It does not, the newsroom does not look like now the same as it looked when you were starting many, many years ago, decades ago. So can you talk a little bit about what that was like? And you also have to bring up the Walter Cronkite moment, because that was it, which also says stuff about writing. So talk a little bit about your well, all of those, that world, the white man's world.
We didn't, like, there wasn't another. I mean, there was Kitchen Table Press.
No, I mean.
Right. But in terms of the mainstream, it was a white man's world. There was no illusion.
Right. That's exactly what it was.
It was their world. And so kind of, they had all the power. That's why I love what I did, which in this point in my life, it was like, I'm going to become that. I'm going to become the buck stops with me. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm doing now. I became y'all. But at that point, it was like, oh, well, it's their world and we have to get permission and our stories have to be approved and we have to write for them. Our writing has to be approved by them. Ultimately, in publishing the same thing, we do need to recognize that in that sense, structurally, things have not changed in terms of the mainstream. The mainstream, overwhelmingly, the buck stops with white, cis men presenting heterosexual of privilege.
Right, exactly.
The buck stops with them. Who owns CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN, Fox, Simon and Schuster, all of them. They're mostly white men. Still, unless you're mixing it up and you're doing your own thing, which is what I did and what we want other people to do to establish their own thing, which is what you did. You inspired me, Cherie. Kitchen Table Press inspired me ultimately. So the story about Walter Cronkite is that I end up working at CBS. Well, the short story version is I go to NPR and I'm like the only first Latina, and it's just like, okay, what is this? Like, okay, I'm out of here. And I go to work for Latinos in public radio in San Diego, which was Latino radio, but they were machistas.
Mm-hmm.
Horrible machistas. There were things that were cut out of the book, which probably for legal reasons. They were horrible. Chicanos, Chicano power, machistas. So I leave
and
there and
say
I
a
end
minute
up,
what that looks like, right? You don't
Ooh.
just say a little bit about what that looks like.
Oh God.
And this year, and the year is what's happening. What's the year now at this?
So
time?
the year is 1986. And basically, I had been at NPR and it was fun. I was the first Latina there. And fun. I mean, I brought Cecilia to work with me, and then Richard Gonzalez was hired and Claudio Sanchez. So we had a little group. But I had very little patience for, being the only Latina and being the first. I had very little patience for it. And I wanted to do my own thing. And so I take this job that gets offered to me in KPBS, in public radio in San Diego, on a show called Enfoque Nacional. And so when I get there, the Chicanos, who were Chicano, I think they didn't realize that they were hiring a feminist. I thought that they were like, oh, this is so cool. We have a Latina journalist. But, if they had studied my curriculum, they would see that I graduated with a degree in women's studies. Mm. So when I get there, it's a very patriarchal, machista vibe, but very Chicano, which meant that culturally everything was cool. Like, órale, qué buena onda, no, o sea, super buena onda, culturally. But that bajita la mano, there was always jokes, side, everything, about women, whether you're, and then there was, how can I say this? There was an inappropriate relationship that was going on that was quite shocking for me as a young woman. It was in the workplace. It was not good. It was very shocking for me. I don't want to get into more detail
because, you don't have to. Yeah.
But I was shocked. I was young. I was 26, 27. And so that's why when people are like, newsrooms now, I'm like, oh, what? Like the things that I saw and had to experience and had to manage. And I think that the way we did it was that now I understand because I'm a boxer, but I was just like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I was weaving and ducking all the time. I was like, okay, racism, sexism. Oh boy, I got to make sure I unsee that because that was just some terrible, because HR, o sea, where there was not a language. We did not have a language for this kind of abusive attitude. So what did I do? I left. I got out of there as fast as I could. That's what it looks like. I was like, oh my God, the kind of subtle racism that I was feeling being the first Latina at NPR in many ways was easier to deal with than this kind of horrific machismo from my own people. That was a rude awakening. And it was important because it meant, what is the greater context of our lucha and where are we really, how do we really develop that issue of solidarity that goes beyond nationalism?
Mm-hmm. So we're going to switch back over to the white man's story about, I asked you that question and got you onto that about the Chicano, because I think
you want me to tell the story about Walter?
The specificity, sometimes it's very, machista, and then you're going, well, what does that really look like? And I think also kind of understanding what you were up against, both, and then you're talking in Chicano, in a specifically Latino context, but when you're in the white man's world, now Walter Cronkite is who? right? Let's say who he is first for people that.
So I
That's before
end
their
up, so that
time.
was the story. I leave San Diego
Yes, okay.
and I go take a job at CBS, which was not where I thought I was going to be, but it was a job and it was going to get me back to New York. And it was a part-time summer fill-in, but it was like, I got to get out of this horrible reality, me voy. And that leads me to then end up, okay, they asked me to produce for Walter Cronkite. Walter Cronkite was like the premier white male journalist, but was not a jerk because he cried when he spoke about the assassination of John F. Kennedy on camera. And so, and he I think also at one point during the Vietnam War, he also lost his cool. So Walter Cronkite was like, again, a journalist of conscience, obviously not a journalist of color, but he was a journalist of conscience. Yes. And kind of like the premier. We don't have that now. I mean, I guess it would be,
because he's kind of like he was sort of first a father and then a grandfather, you know. I mean,
Exacto.
He had that role, yeah.
And all of us, Latinos and Latinas, we all look to him.
That's very true.
Good or bad, now we can have a greater critique, you know, because obviously he was not perfect. But anyway, so I end up having to work for him. I end up producing a special end of the year series for him. And then they said, well, you also have to write his end of the year commentary. And I was like, I know you're kidding me. Like, why would you ask me to write for Walter Cronkite? It's Walter Cronkite. But, you know, the thing about television and radio is that it's true. Many of them, they're not writing their scripts. And Walter by now had retired. He was probably in his late 70s. And so he was the gentleman, you know, and I was like, you want me to write this? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, okay. I freaked out because we live with our deepest insecurities because we are told that we are never good enough because we're living in a white patriarchal society. Exactly. And we internalize this. And so I'm sure I got sick, baby threw up, you know, worried for days and days until finally I was like, I have to write this thing. I had, you know, really thought about it, you know, how to not remove myself, but make sure that I'm writing something solid journalistically. And so I had a yellow legal pad, wrote it, and then I edited it and I showed it to a couple of journalistic friends who were older. They helped me edit it. So by the time that I delivered it, I was like, nah, it's solid. It's a solid critique of the year 1987. It's scathing, but solid. And my editor says, Walter's never going to read this. It's too radical. You're writing this from the perspective of a Mexican Latina. And I was like, no, that's exactly not what I did. I worked, you know, I did not. And so then I said, let's take it for a blind read down to the senior editor of the CBS Evening News, Paul Fisher, I think is his name. Let's take it for a blind read. Don't tell him who wrote it. And let's see what he said. I don't know, Cherie. I guess because I had prepped myself, because I had worked so hard, I was like, there's no way I'm going to not fight for this. Also, I was not going to write another version because I had written so many. I was like, hell no. Like, I'm just not. And I also want the students to remember these moments when something happens where you're like internally like, es que no puedo. Sí. And you never know, right? You have to manage it. Like I didn't say to my boss, no, you stupid. And that. No, I said firmly, but respectfully, well, I disagree. And this is my plan. And so we took it down for a blind read and the guy read it and he was like, no, this is good. Just change this one word. And my editor said to him, he said, you think Walter will like this? I said, yeah, Walter will like this. And it proved to me just like, yeah, fight for it. Yeah. It was a really beautiful moment. And I'm just sad that back then we didn't have phones because I don't have a picture with Walter Cronkite.
Well, and it's a beautiful moment, I think, too, in the book, because you say something about that this man was reading your words, you know, in national TV. This man, this, you know, icon person was reading your words. That's hot. That was really a great moment, you know. Yeah. And the other part that was interesting too is this, don't forget what you're going to say, that you were so tripped about doing it, was so blocked and so freaking out, and you just go, do it. I mean, that's how you describe it and think. I'm just do it. And I think I mean, girl, that happens to this day I assume it's still happening for you because it still happens to me all the time. Just
All the
that's all it is. It's
time.
just do it. Just do it. Not like
So
the
my
Nikes.
my favorite new quote, I'm not giving it exactly, but is from Georgia O'Keeffe, who I happen to love.
Oh yeah, it's a wonderful.
And Georgia has a quote that goes basically like, I'm terrified every single day of my life,
Yes.
but that doesn't stop me from doing anything. And I'm like, yeah.
Thank you.
Terrified, not so much now. Right now, I'm feeling, because post-vax and just kind of like having survived this and trying to really focus on, what's positive and coming. So but of course I get scared. I had to interview John Legend about a month ago. I had to interview Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on Tuesday. After I finished the interview, I was exhausted. And then to be honest with you, I could not sleep. I was so deeply impacted by our conversation where she talked about her experience on January 6th. Que me dejó mal. She's a young Latina. She is in our footsteps, Cherie.
Yeah.
And they wanted to assassinate her. And then I was up. I could not sleep. This never happens to me. I just could not forget her face, the trauma in her face, because I know trauma. I had PTSD.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I wrote about it at 3 a.m. I was thinking like, oh, Cherie's, it's midnight over there. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, whatever. And then they hate on my Twitter for just because I was with AOC. So it's like, damn. So we as Latinas also have to realize how much we are hated. So.
Well, that's the subtitle.
So
of your
we
book.
get to work.
We get to work, but also the subtitle, right? A memoir of love and hate in a torn America. And it's the hate. I mean, I feel it is when you're. I also and Ocasio-Cortez talks about how it did, and we're going to go into this soon too. That it did trigger her other sites of trauma in her life, right? And you never know where that's going to come. You never know how that's going to hit you and where that's going to come in, right? So partly to live that quote about living with fear, there's a certain way, like when I teach writing, I always have the same mantra, which if you're not risking anything, nothing's going to happen. It's like and so there's always that little element all the time, and sometimes quite grand, of fear, because the fear is just the ego part. I don't mean ego, and it's just the fear is ego. It protects you. That's what ego does. Ego protects you. So you're afraid. Okay, well, ¿qué nuevas? ¿Qué nuevas? And the only thing that can happen over the years is that you get used to being afraid. It's not any more complex. You get used to being afraid and you go on anyway, right? So I think I just lost my cosa here. I'm losing you. Here we go. Okay.
I didn't say anything, so don't worry.
You didn't? You just laughed at me losing my I need bigger ears. So let's make this transition. And before, I think I want to go to a little playful part for a little bit before we go into talking more about the trauma. But I mean, it's playful in the sense that what I've found too is that when you're taught, it is a hard, it's a hard balancing act what you were doing in this work. And I don't know how you did it in 1 year, girl. You said you didn't work. That would have took me my book took me 10, it's like, but it is this, you're blending these external obstacles, all this stuff, all these, and all, I mean, from everything, and talking from Vietnam, beginning with Vietnam, and then the Vietnam refugees, and then moving on with, all these key moments, the Central American, the civil wars in Central America, going on then to, finally when you get to, you get up to, the Contra war, then you get at, and all of these also betrayals that happen in there. And then you move on to 9/11. and all the kind of trauma that came up for you in 9/11. So it's like you are packed with all of this external trajectory. But at the same time, there is like this deep internal lack of confidence, self-doubt, constantly questioning oneself, everything, it's pretty deep. And so there's these parts too, and I'll say that sometimes I felt, okay, so one of my students can ask you a question about this, because it's my question. It was my question, okay? Because on one level, there's this María Hinojosa, right? Attractive, she's cool, she's, sexy, she's like, all that. I know you can dance good. I have no doubt. And then there's this other sort of layer in it, right? This other layer about, and then we find also what are the reasons also for some of the questions around desire and everything. But I'm going to ask Laura, Lauren's one of our students, and she has a question to ask you, which actually, I have to say, reverberated with me. Okay, so we'll see.
Hello, my name is Lauren Adler. I'm a first-year MA PhD student in the Department of English, and I'm here today from Professor Moraga's graduate course on the Latinx public voice. And so first and foremost, I want to thank you so much for being here and taking the time to talk to us. I was deeply drawn to this memoir given the ways in which you discuss your reportage through your experience as a Mexican-American woman, which you so beautifully encapsulate in the following quote. So you write, "To me, being a reporter meant seeing the humanity in everyone, especially people who are perceived as invisible and then making it hypervisible to others. The people and stories I wanted to do focus on the forgotten, the other, those who are thought of as different. At the same time, I aim to evoke universal themes that anyone, no matter who they were, could see themselves in my stories. That's how I learned to write a news story. Write it as if you were telling your mother what happened. Connect to the heart of the story to someone else's heart." And so on one hand, I feel connected to what you're saying. As a queer, gender nonconforming person who is also navigating a more male-dominated, cisnormative institution, I feel your words reverberate through my flesh. However, on the other hand, I feel like there were moments in the memoir when you were discussing instances of heterosexual desire, marriage, motherhood, where I felt disconnected because there seemed to be an assumption of normalcy that sort of pulled me away. And so I was wondering if, as a writer whose intention is that anyone could see themselves in your stories, how and in what ways do you navigate the politics of representation?
I was thinking that you were going to ask a question around sex and desire and heteronormativity, which I was like, well, that's an interesting question for me. And I was actually thinking a lot about that in terms of, being a survivor of rape and how that kind of plants a sense of insecurity. So I was actually going in a very different place with your question, but thank you for it. I mean, I think that the whole issue of representation, I mean, for me, I like to try to deal with transparency. I try, and I think that this is, Cherie was just talking about ego. The ego is a very powerful thing, which is why if you recognize that there's a lack of representation or an assumption, I'm the kind of person that's like, I want to hear more about that. Why do you feel that way? So that I can be hyper aware of it for the next time so that it doesn't happen. But at the same time, like when I'm sitting down and writing this or the version that I just finished, which is not public yet, but let's just say it might be this book, but for a young reader's audience, for example, I'm like Cherie, I'm in the moment and I'm doing the writing that is coming to me. So I'm actually not thinking, is this too heteronormative? Is this going to be too, a memoir is kind of self-indulgent, right? I mean, that's part of the whole thing is to make it not too self-indulgent. But I think the writer in me is very much trying to connect to that moment and actually trying to find that thread of humanity, trying. but I think that your question is legitimate. Like, you know, also trying to say that you want to represent everyone it's impossible. So again, for me, it's about transparency, honesty, listening and learning.
Thank you, Maria. That's it is a absolute. I mean, I and we're going to talk about that first part of the quote. You said what you had presumed we were going to talk about is what we are going to talk about in terms of the relationship between trauma and desire and those questions. This, I think, what I would say to you about it, because I related to what Lauren was saying, you know, in some of the reading, right? And
sure.
I also know exactly what you answered, which is when you're writing and you're in it, you want to be true to what you know and your experience and who you are and da-da-da. So the question, I think that and having also, since I also do, since one is like I just wrote, Native Country is a memoir, right? So in the writing of it, right, I have to get very specific about my world, you know, my reality, how my desire works. I mean, all that stuff too, right? But the thing that's interesting about it is that I'm the other, right? When I'm writing as a queer woman, I am the other, right? So when I write about sexuality or my desire or anything, I don't have to do this. And one thing I want to say, I have to frame this. I'm having this conversation with you. I didn't have this conversation with Roberto. And I didn't have this conversation with Luis. I'm having with you, right? So I just want to say, duly noted, right? That there's, and I thought to myself, I'm pushing Maria in a certain, but Luis also felt very pushed, and he was proud of it. He said, you know, thank you. I've never been pushed this hard. This is good. It's all good. Roberto too. But I'm saying, or having this conversation because I think because it is on a certain level to entre mujeres. So that's not a difference between us, right? So when I'm writing as a queer person, my job is to be as specific and accurate and everything. And your job also as a heterosexual is to do the same thing because it's a memoir. You have to be honest about your desire, transparent about you're absolutely true. But there is a way in which, because we're identifying, it's like when you're reading a story by, and I remember this with Jimmy Santiago Vaca. I love his work, wonderful Chicano poet, madly in love with, I just was loving his Martina Meditations on the South Valley, and I was reading, I loved it, the whole first section was great, the second section, and all of a sudden he writes this poem that was like kind of a love poem to his woman, but what I realized is he does something in the poem where he assumes the reader is a man. And I just went, boyfriend, you just betrayed me. I said, you just betrayed me, brother. It was supposed to be for us. And he definitely made it clear the whole writing that person was a man, right? And so that's what we're talking about, is that there is I think that, and it isn't about, you understand this, it's not about political correctness, and it's not about being less authentic than who the person you really are. But to know on some level there's this other world. And so sometimes it's as simple as a line. Mm-hmm. It's as simple as a line that just kind of grounds it in the reality, the same way you do about class, because you talk about your class privilege often, right? But you don't ever talk about your heterosexual privilege, as far as I could remember, right? So that's a legitimate critique, right? So, and thank you. I mean, thank you for just kind of opening the way that we can talk about that. And I think it's a very difficult thing. It's such a difficult argument because we can never get beyond, well, I'm just being authentic to myself, right? Which is not the point, right? It's like we are authentic to ourselves. That's our job as writers. But at the same time, who are we writing for? Who are we, you know, is the queer possibility in our framework, you know? And I think that's really what she was talking about, or what resonated with me about it. Yeah. So
I can't remember if all of, you know, because I wrote an extra 100,000 words, but, you know, part of the reason why also, CHERRÍE, why I knew about you was because I was hanging around with a lot of queer Latina women of color lesbians, even though I was not a lesbian, but that was my crew. Yeah. Right. Uh-huh. Yeah. So I just want to say that was actually a really important part that I know I wrote about it, but I think it got, because, I wrote 100,000 extra words. So,
but they
ended
were
up on the
there.
cutting room
No,
floor.
no, I don't think so. I mean, not
Did
all
it
of
end?
it.
Okay,
No,
okay.
because
Okay. But some of
read
it.
Una Dominicana, was it? I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I love this question. It's definitely making me, like, I'm like, So here's the thing about why, and I hadn't really thought about this until this moment. I didn't realize that I was going to end up writing about my rape, and that the story of my survivor of rape at 16 was going to be something that I was going to be working out in my life and then in the book.
Yeah.
I never would have imagined that. But remember that I'm writing this during the Trump era, right? When, rape and sexual assault by powerful men, and then Brett Kavanaugh is nominated. And so all of this is happening. And so I was very much in my own experience of coming to terms with my desire, with being able to have desire.
Right.
Like, so much of that, when I was coming to terms with, with the trauma of the rape, right, is like, damn, excuse me, but I'm going to use a swear word. So, damn, motherfucker, you took away years of my life of desire that I didn't even understand.
Yes.
And you took that away from me when I was a child at 16. So I was very much in the space of working out that trauma. God, I'm getting all emotional because I didn't want to get emotional, but that's part of what I was working out with, So when you're in that moment, and the hardest part, people are like, what was the hardest part of writing the book? It was like, well, when I had to write about the rape, like that was definitely the part where I was like, crying as I was writing. So that for me, it's like, it was about, because the rape was a rape that occurred in heterosexual relation, right? Absolutely a use of power. And a whole other element that I didn't even understand until recently, actually, which was I was the other to him. I was the American girl, right? He probably raped indigenous women in Mexico as well, because he was a Mexican man of privilege.
Yes.
He didn't rape me because I was indigenous. He raped me because I was considered an American girl. And that to me was just like, wow, like that was really, so I think what I'm trying to say is that I had a lot of trauma to work out around heterosexual sex, frankly, in my own life and in my own relationship. In fact, I just said this to my daughter because, of course, it was her birthday yesterday. And so we spent a lot of time, and we've been just spending a lot of time together. And I've always been very open with her around sex and sexuality. And I said, well, why? And she was like, no, just because you were cool or because you were a feminist. And I was like, no, I was trying to protect you so you would never end up in a situation like me. And so that's the kind of trauma that is like in you that you don't even realize. And I think that's what was happening, is that I was really working out a very heterosexual experience of rape and assault and powerlessness. And, there's a part of me that wishes, because my editor is gay. Mm-hmm. So there's a part of me that wishes and wonders, I actually would like to ask Michelle. Now I kind of want to go back and ask her that question. Like, should we think about this, or why didn't we think about it? Or,
well, see, the thing that's interesting to me, thank you. I just am really, you're a good sister. I really appreciate just the level of this conversation, and it's live and it's all of that. And you're brave as always. I think the thing that I wondered about then, and I'm trying to be very honest. This is my read, right? So it's because I understood that, but I wasn't sure the writer understood it. You see, I understood it. I'm looking at it, and I'm going, okay, now, because we're talking about this, the rape is revealed pretty early on, but then it reverbs. And then the writer's becoming very conscious that this is what she's been holding. 9/11, she had tried, it's like you're having, I'm saying she, because this is Ryan Reed. And so she's, 9/11 has reverb, I have all this traumatic stuff keeps coming back, sex trigger for a smell, triggers it, etc. And then the rape begins to reverberate, in your life, right? So I'm going, aha, that's why there's a lot of stuff around sexuality that seems more performative, because that's the cover for the thing, right? Okay. So, but I'm not always convinced the writer knows that until quite later on in the book. Okay. So that's why I think that, like, when Lauren's talking about that part, because that's much earlier on, that you kind of go, well, why, I guess that's all there is, that's what she thinks heterosexuality is like, it's just, this thing, because it doesn't feel free, right? Later, like when you kind of go through all of this stuff, and then it's the husband, Herman, it's like the relationships on the rocks. Really important stuff. And the trajectory of this is really, really important writing, So you see all of that, and then finally, you get, not that one ever comes to terms with, the things that have broken us in many ways, but there is it's kind of like the conciencia connects with the gut, right? The awareness, and then your marriage is repaired, and the story continues. It's a long life, right? But so there is this kind of resolve in a real, and that felt much more, like grounded, right? So it is, but I think early on it's hard to know whether or not the writer is aware that she's pretending, or that she's performing. That was a question. So I'm asking you questions I've never asked. It's like, so these are the things that come up. These are the things that kind of surface in the book.
Yeah,
right?
no, I think part of what I was trying to communicate was that, for me, the whole issue around sexuality was also revolving around my father's whole obsession with this, right? Mi papá, in the book, I wrote about, mi papá always saying that, in the United States, the women tenían libertad, pero tomaban libertinaje, right? That they took their liberty too far. Mm-hmm. There was the story of my mom in the mirror, and so there was always this kind of thing that was present for me around sexuality, that it was very much tied to the American experience, yes, right? Yeah. It was very, it was the thing that my father was the most worried about.
Mm-hmm. Because that was liberation, right? That was being conflated with independence.
Yeah. It was not about, women getting a job isn't that good. It was like, American women are free because they want to have a lot of sex. Pero papi, por favor. No. I'm going to en paz descanse, because I learned so much from my father, and I have, he handed down so many good things to me. But I'm very clear that there were these negative parts of my dad, right? And he did pretty good for trying to reform these parts of himself. We had to, deal with his homophobia, like, a lot. We had to really deal with it. So this thing with my father around sex and American women and being too free, these were the most aggressive battles in my home. My sister going out on dates at 16, pleitos, my mother going to work, and we realized later it wasn't just that she was going to work, it was that she was working with men. Yeah. Now, later, actually, the afternoon that I told my mom and my brothers and my sister that I was writing about the rape, that I had to, that we actually had to have that conversation, that we took out the calendar, the pictures, and we saw who it was who raped me and all of this. That was when my mother also revealed the sexual assaults that she survived. And several of them occurred when she was working in that place that my father didn't want her working, at the clothing store. And she said, ay, ¿tú crees que yo le dije a tu papá de que the guy pinned me up against the wall? Of course, I never told your father, because he would have forced me to quit my job, or he would have tried to come and, kill this guy. I doubt it though, because my dad was a scientist nerd. But so it was a thing. This almost obsession with, again, our reputations all around sex.
I think it's evident, I think I also really, my mother had a very different history because she was forced into the world, very young.
Yes.
So she knew a lot about sex and men and dangers and all that. But we were raised very much in the same way, which is, very, very, it was like, and just like you described about your cousins, your Mexican cousins, well, these are Chicano cousins, and they're, the only way you left your house was you got pregnant, 17, got out, or you got pregnant at 22 and you got out, whenever it was. But that's the only way. It's marriage or pregnancy, and hopefully the one came before the other. And it was, and there was, in my family, there was nothing else was done but that, And I really feel like, as far as I can remember, I was the first person to ever leave home, not married, and to also honestly, to live with somebody, to live with a man, yes, I've lived with a man, live with a man and say, that's what I'm going to do. And, it's in native country, but my mom's saying, just marry him, mija. I go, Mom, I don't know yet. I go, I just want to see. I just want to live him for a while. If it's going to work, no, that's okay. Even if you get divorced right away, marry him. I'm going, this is the biggest hypocrisy in the world, right? And so we're that, it's like, I'm older than you, but it is that generation where you're challenging those kind of strictures from that kind of, it's different. There's, our Mexicanism has a lot in common. I'm talking about all of us as Mexicanos. There's a lot in common, but there's also distinctions based on class, immigration. All kinds of how many years you've been in the United States, everything, But that is a kind of, that thing about that sex then becomes a site sort of a rebellion, is a really recurring thing among many of us, certainly when, my comadres, when I was young, the same thing. So
let me tell you, I wish, I look at other members of my family. I'm not going to reveal who tienen una vida sexual muy plena.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, wow. And my mom, now that she's older and dad has passed away, talks a lot about, my mom they had a good time.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, wow, I didn't. It took me a long time.
Well, and that's I'm interrupting you. You go ahead. Finish.
No, what I'm trying to communicate to survivors of sexual violence is that, and I think, I wasn't expecting to write about this, but the whole thing is like, there is, if you are able to do the work with a therapist, somebody who can guide you in this, there can be some healing. And for me, knowing that there can be healing was just like incredible. And so I did just in the last week, I remember just thinking like, wow, that family member has a really good sex life and has for decades, fearless, open, and me, same family, same. So the rape just really. I'm trying to make up for it.
Well, I wish you well. I wish you lots of it and good quality. It's good. It's good. But you're so right. It's like and over all my years of teaching too, and just in my in relations. My relations are with women. So as my relations being with women, there's plenty of, survivors in that spectrum of people, And as a teacher of creative writing, lots of women, and I can say honestly, at least it's bigger than a third, have, we do the writing exercises to get down, and one of the exercises I always use is, I was not supposed to remember. That's the lead line.
Yeah.
And I go, well, not supposed to finish the line. Keep doing it. Like, in school, they say I was not supposed to talk in class. I was not supposed to remember, fill the line until you land into a story. And when those stories come up, it's like, and then they write the story, and then they'll say I was, whatever the incident was. And I say, no, tell me the color of the sheets.
Mm.
And what I'm saying, and this kind of reverbs on what Roberto was talking about, because he was saying this book he said writing this wasn't therapeutic. It wasn't supposed to be I didn't write it to be therapeutic. And I said, yeah, but it healed you. I go like that. And that's the point, is that you say, what color are the sheets? But not because you're trying to make the writing therapeutic, but because el arte cura. It just does. It just does. You will be a better person if you can do that. And your book is testimony to that. You see a kind of wholeness kicking in, at the end. And that is in, it's like, it's an honest, true story. And it isn't, I think that's partly one of the questions I wanted to ask you too about your process in writing this, and you did talk about, like what were some of the things that you talk about at one point. You had mentioned to me a thing about having out of body experiences in the writing process, also the ways in which you do, in your process to help you access, right? Because partly the thing, this is a good question. I love it. Okay. Full transparency, I asked Maria to tell me, what question do you want me to ask that you haven't been asked? Okay, so I'll just repeat the question. And she says, these are the questions. What was it like to experience out-of-body experiences while you were writing? And how did self-hypnosis and cannabis help you as a writer? Okay? So there you go. I just asked you those questions.
First of all, I was like, oh, I hate this. I was like, why is CHERRÍE asking me this that I have to think about? Because I was like, I was racking my brains. And then I was like, okay, well, so, so I figured, so CHERRÍE, you're like, how did you write this so fast? Well, because, as a journalist, I have very tight deadlines. So a notion of taking a year to write a book, I'm like, are you kidding? Like, what? So I become like a terror. And I don't really have time to think. So it's more like once I had the outline, which my editor, Michelle, forced me to write, because I was resistant.
Can I interrupt you? So did this book, did you self-generate it, or were you approached about doing it?
No, I self-generated.
Okay.
So straight up. So here's what happens. So Susan Bergholtz, a very famous agent who represents, she's retired now, but Sandra Cisneros, etc. She gets in touch with me in the year 1990, no sé qué, 94 or 5. And she says, you should write a book. And I'm like, are you crazy? You represent Sandra Cisneros. Why are you talking to me? She's like, you should write. So the first book I wrote wasn't with her. It was a book of interviews with gang members based off of an NPR story. It was for young adults, hardcore Brace Jovanovich way back when. And it was fine. It was for young adults. Then Susan and I worked together on a book that I didn't want to be a memoir, but the publishers wanted a memoir, which became Raising Raul, which was Mommy Lit before Mommy Lit existed and before I understood the ins and outs of the publishing business. And it's a very brutal business. And if the book doesn't sell, basically you feel like terrible, to not say a 4-letter word. So I was like, I'll never write another book again because this was terrible. And it didn't sell. And I I was, everybody loved the book, but it didn't sell. And so I'm a terrible writer and I'm not meant to write books. And then this thing with Donald Trump happens. And a friend of mine says, you need to write the book, Illegal is Not a Noun, which is one of my catchphrases, if you will. And I was like, you know what? I do have to write that book, but I'm going to write a small book, a little book, like a pocket book. That was because I was too afraid to talk about fear. I was like, I'm not writing a big book, but I can write a little book, like you can pick up in the airport when you buy your candy. It's going to be Illegal is Not a Noun, why you should never use
like a little
that
pamphlet,
word.
like a pamphlet almost.
Yeah. So I'll show you like the kind. Here, I have it over here. Sorry that you're seeing my armpit. Okay. But like these little books, like Thich Nhat Hanh, How to Walk.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
So I love these. These are, and Sandra Cisneros is like big fan of Thich Nhat Hanh. So this is what I wanted to write, a small book.
Okay.
And then basically, I get an agent. I write more or less the proposal of what I want to do. And then it's like, we actually want a big book. That's how it happens, Cherie. So it was self-generated in the sense that I felt a historical responsibility. I was like, God, I have to. I cannot be quiet, which people had said before, but I hadn't had that level of rage until now. That was the genesis of the book. And I don't, I don't know the book sales. I know it's doing okay, but I purposefully told my agent, I don't want to know.
Yeah.
Only when it's like a really, really wonderful, great news. As you know, if you follow me on my social media, I'm continuously promoting the book because I learned that that's how you do it.
Yeah.
You don't wait for the publisher. I have to get this out. And the beauty is the response that, people are having to the book, that they feel connected to it.
Yeah, very much so, very much so. Okay, so is the, I think that one of the things, so you didn't answer my question about the,
Well, what's the question?
It was the one about the cannabis.
Oh,
and,
okay.
Okay. But the reason why I'm asking you, okay, wait a minute.
You didn't answer my question. I'm answering my question.
The reason why I'm asking you that is because, and it's interesting because I also had, post interview conversation with Roberto, and he had his little tales to tell me about how he accessed a lot of censored material that were censored in his life, right? In his book, The Unforgetting is very powerful. And he had to dig up, a lot of very difficult emotional material. Well, you have to too. And so partly my question was in this is that how, in fact, do you get through, how do you have the courage or the access to lift the censors so you can get to the real stories?
And that's where I was going, which is that I don't have the time to deal with the censors.
Okay. So you get some help.
Well, one, it's understanding that I'm going to write when I'm writing something like this. I'm writing every single day, which means that I'm in the mornings, which means that I'm kind of living in a place where I have to be open and sensory.
Right.
So how do I do that? Well, I meditate in the morning, especially now more so than when I was writing the book. I'm doing mantra meditation. I'm doing sound meditation, theta waves, beta waves,
right.
all of this kind of stuff. Because, I just finished writing another version of this book. And so that I really went into a hypnotic state to write this young reader's version because I had to become a child.
Good. Yeah.
So how do I do it? I'm telling you, Cherie, I do it. I'm like, you don't have any time to not do it. You don't have any time to deal in the, well, am I going to lose the censor today? Am I not going to lose it? It's like, go into it and just go there. Now, yes, to remove, right? So what do? I smoke pot. It's something that I didn't realize, right? I didn't think that it would help me, but in fact, it allows me to get into a space where I'm not thinking about some of the questions that you're asking. I'm not thinking about, because I'm just I'm in the sensory place. And, to explain the out of body experience, it's more just like allowing yourself to be in that place that feels a little scary. As a writer, I mean, I used to write by hand. I think I wrote Raising Raúl in large part by hand, and then I put it into the computer, but there is something about like just the moment when you're sitting there and te estás entregando, right? And to me, it is kind of a meditative experience. It's kind of like not worrying how the sentence is coming out. Right. I mean, I feel very lucky. I now have an editor who actually went to Stanford, where you used to be, who is Asian American, and she's my first reader. And I trust her so much that I can hand her stuff that I feel is like, this is terrible. Because there's no periods, because I didn't go back and I didn't clean it up, because I'm like, and she'll be able to see, no, here it is. Yeah. Here it is.
Good editor.
This is the sentence. This is what we want. So I purposefully try to get into a meditative state. And I'm always playing with it. Like a lot of what I did with this new version is I was dictating it. Because I was trying to be a child telling a story like a child talking to a 12-year-old. When I'm talking to a 12-year-old, I'm not writing on a computer. I'm a communicator. Right. So it's like I did the audio book before I did the written book.
Exactly.
Because it's like I want to tell it to a kid. So I'm like, so let me tell you what happened. So then we were in the car, and then this happened, and then, oh my God, and I'm trying to write it like that.
That's good.
Because I want to write it for young people. Yeah. And it's hard. Like, we're just handing in the work soon. And so we'll see, because now I'm going to have a new editor who is an expert at young adult. But I'm trying to make it, like the way you would talk to a kid. So it's different, but I'm playing with it and I'm not afraid. I think that's the thing that matters, is that I'm not afraid to go there. I'm not afraid to get into a meditative state. I'm not afraid if something becomes out of body. I'm not afraid if I start crying. I'm not afraid that one day it's going to be terrible, because I know that maybe the next day it's going to be better. Right. So I've lost a lot of the fear around writing books, and thank God. But I'm really pissed off that for a couple of decades there, I was too afraid. It's the same way I feel about sex. I'm like, damn, you might have been able to write. I don't think I told you, Cherie, I'm incredibly proud. It's public now. This is a big deal for me. I wrote my first piece of fiction that's going to get published. And I'm really excited about it. And so there's a part of me that's like, bitch, you let some publishers tell you that you weren't, and you lost 20 years of writing when you just wrote this book. When's going to be the next one? When's going to be the next one? So now I have to make up for it, just like I'm making up for the sex.
Well, I wish you well in that too. No, it's I think what you're saying too about, the semantic relationship with writing is really important. I mean, people have different ways of accessing that, but I know that that's exactly what it is. I mean, even for myself, when I write, I do this sometimes because I'm stupid in my brain, and if I could talk, and the oral is my tradition, that's my literary tradition, and I just start talking, and also moving around, shouting, crying, doing all that. It's like, that's the easy stuff now. I mean, it's like, that's the part where you do get used to these sort of, ways of doing things. And it's, but you even though you had that long period where you didn't write, you are a seasoned writer. In other words, you've been working with language and, for years and years and years, And it is, I'm glad you told the story about that publishing experience, shut you down, because that's the biggest way. So it always has to be that you're writing for yourself. That's the first thing, that it has to be that what's motivating the writing is that you have to tell this story, or however it is, that because nobody can take that away from you, right? If you always use that as the ground, I'm not giving you advice, I'm saying it like say one has to do this, because it really, I always think for myself too, that like the first book that I wrote that wasn't This Bridge Called My Back, there was my own book, Loving in the War Years. I mean, no, what, Chicana lesbian? We're going to say, what this is, there's no audience for this. But the thing of it is, in the initial writing, there wasn't. But because of Bridge, which came out before the initial writing I was working on Loving in the War Years before Bridge. Bridge gave Gloria and me and the writers in that collection a national reputation. So I had this feeling that if I wrote, it might matter to somebody. And that is such a lucky thing, right? Because not that I've ever had the first New York house that ever published my work was Native Country. And I was 60, how old am I now? So I was 66 years old. That's my first New York house, right? So what does that tell you?
Damn, I don't know if I didn't know that, Cherie.
No, and all the rest, they've been in the South End Press, leftist press, they've been feminist presses, they've been, all of this. And with Chicana Codex, it was a university press. But never about big sales. What it is that I got that book and I can go talk to people. I can read it aloud, I can converse with people. It's like you're a messenger, with your text, in your hand. And so it's like, but, luckily, I think because I had that experience with Bridge, that I just each time, you still go to places and you see, particularly for me, it's very moving when you see young raza, and you go to these places and every time a person comes up to you, and I know they've told you this, it's like they come up to you and they say, you saved my life. They go, oh, I know you hear this all the time. And I go, yeah, but I didn't hear it from you. I didn't hear it from you. Because it's not us, it's them. It's not about you. It really isn't, and that's how you survive on the long run, is that it's not about you. It's about, you put in the world, and it's about, that world, so.
Cherie, people, Latino USA is going to be turning 30 in 2023, so kind of around the corner. And that's a long time to be around, which means that we've been through hell and back.
Yes.
And the reason why I didn't walk away from the show, which I only started producing it in 2010. Prior to that, it was produced elsewhere. Mm-hmm. I was just the talent for the show. But the reason why I never walked away was because of our commitment to the audience.
Yep.
And one of the things that I missed the most about not being out and about is that you're exactly right, Cherie. Like you, I'm very lucky that people, when we were out in public, would come and they would wrap their arms around me and they would cry in my shoulder and they would say, you say, and you're like, is this possible? How is this possible? And it's like, I understand.
Yeah.
We take, and I learned this from you, we take our leadership, not with ego, but with humility and responsibility, yeah. I think. And that's why people connect with you, Cherie, is because they understand that you give this not because, Cherie, but because you give it with a lot of love and humility, and you accept the tears. Not everybody can accept the tears. And so thank you for saying that. And I do see you, and I can't wait to be hugging people again. I am hugging people now, straight up.
Yes.
I am.
Yes.
Like I hugged AOC. I was like, come here, girl, come here. And we were like hugging. I am hugging people because if they're fully vaxxed and I'm fully vaxxed, I'm taking it from the CDC, I can hug.
That's what I've done. Exactly.
It's just that I'm hugging a lot tighter and a little bit longer.
A little bit longer. Yes.
But I do look forward to being out and about with people from across the country, because there's nothing quite like that, Cherie. When you come to New York and you find, young women here of every background who love you and
Yes,
who,
that is,
want to be close to you. So we are very blessed
yeah,
to
we
be in
are.
this position of
Indeed.
leadership.
Indeed. So I think that what we're gonna, it's, I'm looking again. I'm not as cool as you. I look at the clock, and obviously, and then you're very good at all of this stuff. But I think that what I'd like to do, kind of, there's a couple of just quick questions I want to ask you that have been on my mind. I want to ask these of you, and they don't have to be long. And then I want you to read the closing part of your book, just because it's a great note to end on. So these are kind of quick questions, which are impossibly not quick, but they came to mind. And so one of them is, so we already talked about white supremacy and all this kind of stuff, but then why are so many Latinos Republicans?
You want a quick question?
Just a quick
You're
one.
adorable. You're adorable. This is a complicated question, but here is the truth. There will be more Latinos and Latinas becoming Republican and voting for a Republican Party for Trump. So we need to recognize that. And I think we all have to collectively be trying to answer that question, because I don't have the exact answer. I think it's really complicated. People close to me voted for him. Mm-hmm. People who were anti-Trumpers became Trump supporters. I think it is deeply complex. I think that there is an element of machismo that we have to really understand and pick apart. I think we have to understand self-hatred in a way. What happens when you are attacked in a country over and over and over? And that's what the book is about, right? Is that feeling attacked as an immigrant or as Latino in the United States has been policy. It's right here. It's been policy. So people are going to be like, I don't want to be that. I'm going to walk away from that as far as I possibly can and shut the door behind me. So I think we all together have to be doing this work of el porqué and trying, I know it's hard, to listen before we're jumping on people. I said I don't have any patience. And so that's why if you're in one of those days when you have no patience, then don't have the conversation. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, trying to listen to understand what is going on, and then trying to start conversations that are based on fact and bringing it to las cosas bien, in your community. Like, do you really feel a threat from this or that? Basing it in reality. But do we all have to do this work? Yes. And so Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's basically was saying, it's all about what we're doing. It's not about what she's doing. Yes, she's okay. Not about CHERRÍE, it's what all of y'all are doing, what we are doing together.
Yes. Okay, one other question, and then I would like you to read that closing. So I was listening to your Latino USA conversation with Lulu Garcia Navarro, which I really enjoyed very, very much. And you have this line that says, the country will suffer the consequences of our invisibility. And you tied that to Biden around immigration, his position on immigration. It's a great line. The country will suffer the consequences of our invisibility. And this is the Latino public voice, is so we are visible, and very much was a reaction to virtual, brownout, of Latinos, for the last year with COVID, with Black Lives Matter. I mean, all the ways in which, our voice was missing. So this is a line that really hit me. I'm going to put it up someplace. But you were responding to Biden's position on immigration.
It's an obsession of mine because somehow, even though we are the second largest voting bloc, i.e. hugely powerful, and that we voted more than we ever have before, that the fact that throughout the entire mainstream media that you have no sense of Latino and Latina political power should be frightening to everybody who cares about democracy. I don't know. I mean, it's not it's not just about Latinos and Latinas, by the way. You know, I mean, I hate it that it's just like, oh my God, anti-Asian violence. And then you have Asian American folks on television. I'm looking over here because the television is on over here, you know, on mute, but on cable. And it's like, so you would see Asian American faces then, but then they disappear. And it's like,
Right.
do you not understand that how Asian Americans, how Latinos feel about Black Lives Matter is important? We have to be in that conversation. We are in the fact that many young Latinos and Latinas in this moment will be solidly choosing to define themselves as part of the Black Lives Matter movement is incredibly important for the future of democracy. We need to be talking about that. How often do you see Latinos and Latinas on television talking about our relationship to Black Lives Matter, to how we feel about what happened, you know, with, you know, the verdict with Derek Chauvin, you know, to how we feel about what's happening with the Republican Party. So I am obsessed with this. We are not being gaslit. We are being invisibilized. Mm-hmm. Now, you know, there's two ways to look at this. One way is to just say, well, you know, mainstream, I don't care. I don't really, you know, I'm not getting my news from you, and I'm not looking to you to validate what I'm doing. And we're part of that. Futuro Media is part of that. It's like, we actually don't need to be on Meet the Press because we created our own Meet the Press. It's called In the Thick. Yeah. And we're nominated for a Webby. By the way, please vote. If you haven't voted, go vote for the Webby for In the Thick, because we're nominated and it's all voter like you. Right on. Yeah, Meet the Press is not nominated. We are. So por una parte, it's like, we don't really, like, I don't really care about the mainstream media. On the other hand, we're competing with you. We're taking you on. Mm-hmm. So now actually you want to deal with us, because we're actually doing really interesting stuff. So anyway, to answer your question, Cherie, I am obsessed with the invisibility of Latinos and Latinas and the conversation of immigrants. And I do everything that I can every day to try to combat that. I pitch myself to MSNBC. I don't work for them. I have to pitch myself as Judy Reyes, the great actress from Claws and Scrubs and all. You know, we're in touch on something. She's like, girl, I have to go audition. Can you believe it? I'm this old and I'm still having to audition. I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, and I'm still pitching myself to MSNBC. Like, you should really have me on so we can talk about Latinos and the Democratic Party and the Republican Party and how, you know, et cetera. So I'm okay. It's a little bit about ego. Okay, I'll own that. But it's also like, I am not going to let you invisibilize us. Not gonna let it happen. So I'm gonna do my work, put it out there, huge, but I'm also, te voy a molestar a ti. Sí. New York Times, MSNBC, CNN, te voy a molestar a ti también.
Yeah, right. Okay, last night, was it last night or the night before? Por casualidad, I turned on the TV and I see you on Ancestry, what is it?
No, Finding Your Roots.
Finding Your Roots, that's it. You know, with Gates, right? With Mr. Gates, Dr. Gates. Okay, we don't have to talk much about it, but so we go through all of the relations, right? And who was the guy, who was the white actor? I forget his name. Now his name went out of my mind. But he's the guy
from Third Rock from the Sun.
And Dexter, he was in Dexter.
Dexter, he was in Dexter
anyway,
also.
Okay, so white man.
John Lithgow.
There you go. Good actor. And so, okay, so they're doing him and they're doing you, right? So he finds out, you know, he's basically from the Mayflower and everything else, right? And he's cool with that. He's just cool with that. He's going, that's great, right on. Oh man, I got this heritage. He's all excited, okay? So then you get yours. Okay, so then they do you. They find about this, you know, this Spaniard, you know, like Indian killer, all this stuff, right? I mean, it is horrible. You're going, oh my God. I mean, you were feeling terrible. It's like, it's killing you. It's like you can see it if you're going, you're turning the page and go, oh God, oh God, oh God, like that. And we all, not all, I mean, when we're talking about Mexicanos, it's a whole range from puro indígena, pueblo originario, to mestizos, to all the way to full white people. We know that, right? In the makeup of who we are. And it's always a lot of questions come up. So what I appreciated about that is that you were dealing. I mean, it's like you don't know what they're going to say, and you were really having to confront this part of you that, has these, the conquistador, because he actually traced it to some conquistador people, right? And then he turned another page, and this is the part that got me, and I just have one question to ask you about that. So then he turns another page, and it was just that there was this Native woman, indigenous woman, indigenous American woman, in your lineage, and you start crying. You start crying, okay? So this is, so we are part of, this is Las Maestras Center for Chicana Indigenous Thought, Art, and Social Practice. And so when we're looking at Latinidad, and we're looking at, Afro-Latinidad, we're looking at Native Latinidad, we're looking at mestizaje, we're looking at, all of these questions. The people that we feature or that are coming in through are all on this sort of spectrum, But always that's the question that we come to, right? Is that, so why did you cry? Why did you cry? And why does it matter?
Well, we're not going to sum up everything that first of all, the history documents the history of the men. So that, I think, for me was just like the horror of like, wow, shoot. So like the women are just like passing characters. Absolutely. It's all about the history of the men. So all I know is the history of the men in my lineage, right? Because they were in the books. The women, it's like, was married to. Yeah. Or in my case, was murdered by. And so it was kind of, you're right. John Lithgow had no problem with the fact that his family came on the Mayflower and they were probably responsible for all kinds of genocide and horrible things. And he was like,
he was good.
This is so cool. And I'm like, oh my God. Also, Henry Louis Gates didn't ask John Lithgow those questions. He didn't, not that ended up on the show, which is like, well, how do you feel about the genocide that you're right, he didn't. People brought? He didn't ask. But for me, it was like conquistadores.
Yeah, but still, it was quite evident also in your response.
Yes, I'm taking responsibility.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Holy jeez. It's like, wow. I mean, because por Dios. So the thing that happened at the end, because it was the last thing that Henry Louis Gates said to me, it was like, so what we do want you to know is that while we saw all of this, the mitochondria, the maternal line, right, where you get your maternal base, everything female on your line is solidly indigenous, Native American. And that's when I was like, oh my God, yes. That's when because I think it was just like the realization of, one, how many in my line are also survivors of rape, how many in my line of indigenous women were able to find love maybe in an unexpected place, because I fell in love with an Afro-Taino man, right? So how many of them, were silenced? And then also just, I think, a deep feeling of, I have some work to do. I have some work to do around this indigenous space for me. If I am fully 1/4 indigenous, I need to own that. I need to own what that looks like. I need to do the work around that. Because I'm in New York, there was a time when I thought I was going to be initiated into the Yoruba religion. I write about that because it's a very strong kind of presence, and I was very open here. And when I went to get my one of my several official Yoruba readings, it was like, this path is very open to you. You are welcome in this path, in this space, but this is not what's being called to you spiritually. Actually, you're being called spiritually to do the indigenous work. That was like 30 years ago. So I think there's something that I have to do. And the pandemic certainly put a damper on that, but I think it's part of the work that I have to do. And I'm kind of, maybe that's now, of course, there's a lot of conversations in my family. Tenemos que regresar a Málaga. We've got to go back to Spain. We've got to go find where we were in Cuba, because it turns out that we were in Cuba. Right. So that means that, is there some Afro-Cuban? I'm sure of it. If you look at my uncles,
that's
my
what
mom,
I was
of course, is getting. My mom is getting all the photographs. Pero mira el tío Benito, mira los labios, mira la nariz, mira el pelo, mira. O sea, I sent a photograph of my aunt to Sandy, my best friend who's Black, and I was like, "Is this woman Black?" It's not saying anything. She was like, "Hell yeah, she's Black. She looks like she's Malcolm X's wife." I'm like, "That's my aunt." So,
like the phrase goes, "¿Quién es tu abuela?" ¿Verdad? They always
exacto,
say,
exacto, exacto. So. Now I think I have some work to do, not only on the issue of becoming, as a survivor, but also in terms of figuring out what happened. What is this thing that happened in my background, and giving the women in my lineage a voice.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay. All right. A very short little quote that will bring us back around to your title here, Once I Was You, right? That's where we had started. So
I think you want me to pick up on 310 where it says when people ask me.
And that,
okay.
It's a short section.
It
and
is.
I think it'll bring things full circle to what we had kind of first talked about.
Wow. Okay.
Your work.
So it says, when people ask me what interview has inspired me the most in my career, it would make sense to say Sonia Sotomayor, the most powerful Latina in the world, or Michelle Bachelet, the first woman president that I ever interviewed, who served as Chile's president twice. Both women did inspire me, but these days it is Noemi and Bobby who shed their light on me. They are flawed, uneven human beings, mistaken as misfits, as the miserable. To me, Bobby and Noemi are finding their voices quite literally, and I am humbled to be allowed to witness this. They're Honduran refugees. I feel some mystical tie to Bobby. My father wanted to give those who lacked it the gift of hearing. I bet there's a medical doctor out there who will be able to help Bobby regain his sight. And Noemi is like my own mother. She stood up for herself and her vulnerable child. Noemi, like my mom, was a woman born to be an American citizen because she was actually willing to die for her right to speak up and protect her child. My mom was ready to take on a man who looked like a redwood. She was prepared to do whatever it took to never let them take me, just like Noemi did with Bobby. I am you, Noemi. I am you, Bobby.
So we go back to your title, right? And that's what you were saying. That's what you were trying to say. This, profound identification, which motivates your work. I think about, that now what, the Mayan idea of the tú eres mi otro yo.
Tú eres mi otro ser, mi otro yo. I.
Yeah, exactly. So beautiful.
So you need to know this. I actually am crying right now because I don't know where Bobby and Noemi are. I don't know. This is what happens, when people are like, oh, that mass of people on the border and they're so scary. And it's just like, what you don't understand is that you push people into such a place of fear and desperation. And she got her refugee status. So por lo menos tiene eso, but she has nothing else. And so she is in, I don't know where she is. I wake up every day and I'm like, oh my God, where is she? Where's Bobby? Where are they? The last I knew, they had left New York in the middle of the pandemic and had relocated to Louisiana near Shreveport. Mm-hmm. It didn't look, Bobby, I saw him and he was laughing, which made me very happy. He was just smiling and laughing. And he remembered my voice. And so that made me very happy. And then the next thing I knew, she had moved back to New York, which I'm just like, how do you get from Shreveport to New York City with no money, in the middle of a pandemic? And she has since disappeared. So I don't know where she is. I cannot, I try to call her every week. And so I'm quite desperate because this is somebody who I care deeply for, and I'm seeing straight up firsthand what happens with human beings when they are thrown into the tumult of, a fucked up immigration system that is all about dehumanizing people. These are the people who Joe Biden needs to be welcoming on his knees. He needs to be wrapping his arms around Bobby and Noemi and saying, teach me how to be a better human being.
Well, Maria, what can I say? I have a list of thank yous here, but the first thank you is to you. Thank you for teaching us, really, just teaching us. It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I'm really moved. I'm really happy. I was afraid to come here. So you have great tears. We love you. We are grateful to you. We appreciate you. I wish you the best of luck with this book and all your work. Thank you for, also this, your great new, Futuro media is like, more power to you, sister. Do it, as they say, by we control the means of production, That's
I
great.
do control the means of production, and I love it.
Yes, very, very good. So anyway, it's been an honor and a pleasure, and we're going to reconvene, the whole group of us, in a couple of weeks down the road. So I look forward to that, seeing you again in that way, and then seeing you in the flesh,
Thank you,
So,
Mamita. I can't
you're
believe you
welcome.
all made me cry. Seriously, come on now.
Also, we want to also thank all the people that helped us out here too. Celia Herrera Rodriguez, of course, the co-director and my co-conspirator here at Las Maestras Center, and Maya Gomez, our associate director, Stephanie Rubio, our publicist, and Mariela Aguilar, who is our program coordinator, graduate student research assistant, does a lot of the publicity for us as well. Our interns, Yesenia, Angel, and Vanessa. And then the UCSB video services here, have been really great. Alma Trejo and Erica Snell, Avery Wheeler, we thank you. And subscribe, please, to Las Maestras Center. Find us on Instagram. Donate. We would really we could use some money. This is we have a little spot here at UC Santa Barbara and are able to, produce some good work, but we cannot continue without your help. So please do subscribe to us, and there's a little place where you can donate as well. Reminders for the week that comes that we're going to have Cristina Rivera Garza, the author of Grieving, and she'll be the last in our series. And then we have then a final gathering of all the 4 writers she's on May 20th, and then 1 week later, May 27th. So gracias todos.